English translation, 711th contact. Part 2. Monday, the 8th of October 2018, 21:56 hours.
Exactly. Then I was not mistaken. And I think that it should also be talked about what you explained to me some time ago, about the ancestry of Donald Trump regarding the fact that various of his former personalities were not exactly pleasant figures, with at least one even having appeared in an extremely vicious manner in one of their former lives. In this regard, you mentioned that you had clarified, as you did with Elsie, whose earlier personalities led unpleasant lifestyles, that various earlier personalities from Donald Trump's incarnation line also led lives that were not exactly pleasant, but could even be described as reprehensible. It was also interesting that the whole thing took place in Trump's actual incarnation line, or generational ancestral line. That is to say, in the line of his ancestors, thus not in a different and foreign line. If you could perhaps explain something about this again, then that would certainly be something that would interest some people. In the meantime, I have also searched the internet according to your information and found some things that also correspond to your explanations and in certain cases correspond to what you explained to me about one of the earlier personalities of Donald Trump, who, as we know, had German ancestors. On the internet, I found the following on Wikipedia, among other things, which I have copied out and now show you here, although this has nothing to do with his earlier personality and the story you have told. Donald John Trump, D.A.N. L.D. Dzan Trump, born the 14th of June 1946 in Queens, New York City, New York, is an American entrepreneur, entertainer, and the 45th President of the United States. He is the owner of the conglomerate Trump Organization and led it as CEO from 1971 to 2017. He built a billion-dollar fortune in the real estate industry, and he made his name Trump a brand. He became one of the best-known personalities in the United States, especially through his reality show The Apprentice, 2004-2015. Trump supported various political parties and is, with a short interruption, registered as a Republican since 2009. As their candidate, he won the presidential election on the 8th of November 2016 against Hillary Clinton and became U.S. President on the 20th of January 2017. The first to do so without prior political office or military rank, and with the highest age at inauguration. His eclectic, changeable political program contains elements of populism, protectionism, and isolationism. Trump attracts media attention in a special way with simple language, provocative statements as well as radical proposals, for example on immigration and Islam, and becomes an information producer himself through the use of Twitter. Maybe I can also bring up these copies here then, when you have repeated the matter again.
I can comply with your request, because it will probably really be of interest to the core group members, etc. What is to be said with regard to Donald Trump's former personalities and what I have fathomed in the past corresponds to a matter that lies in the distant past and is not really directly relevant at present or is not directly related to the present personality. At the present time, from a certain point of view, Trump undoubtedly shows different tendencies to earlier personalities. So with regard to their characters, moralities and behavior, etc., according to which he also lives out a morality or a moral attitude and morality, a moral feeling and behavior, etc., which were also characteristic of various of his earlier personalities. And one of these earlier personalities, according to my investigations, had degenerated particularly badly, namely one who had lived in the 16th century in Germany in a small town called Bedburg and had been known under the name of Peter Stump, alias Stube Peter. This man was said to have been a devilish sorcerer and to have lived intimately with a relative named Katharina Trump, who was described as a female devil. This Peter Stump had a false name, for in truth his real name had been Peter Trump, named after his illegitimate mother, for he was an illegitimate son of a Trump daughter who came from Karlstadt in the Palatinate on the Weinstrasse. The latter had secretly had an adulterous relationship with the father of the family, Stump, in Bedburg, had been impregnated by him, and secretly gave birth to their son, Peter. Father Stump had then claimed, when he was forced to do so under threats by the Trump daughter after the secret birth of his son, that he had found the newborn boy in the field as an abandoned child. According to this statement, he then adopted him as his own with the consent of his wife, who knew nothing of her husband's relationship with the Trump daughter, and gave him the name Peter Stump. When the young Peter Stump alias Trump then grew up, he married a woman whom, however, he poisoned and thus murdered. Because he grew tired of her and was already involved with a relative named Katerina Trump, who had his real mother come to Bedburg from Karlstadt, a daughter of one of her younger nieces. So the Trump daughter, that is to say the mother of Peter Stump, who stayed with Father Stump for years, ordered a daughter of her niece to Bedburg to join her son Peter Stump, that is to say Peter Trump, after the poisoning of his wife. Peter Stubb, whose real family name was that of his mother and thus Trump, degenerated at a young age and became a multiple murderer, as well as a cannibal and rapist of his own daughter, committing 18 murders in the course of about 25 years, and also cooking and eating body parts of his murder victims, thus practicing cannibalism. He also committed a number of other rapes as well as robberies and thefts. Especially around Cologne, many murders happened at that time, and also many human beings disappeared without a trace, which got around all over the country. Consequently, it was not strange that many persons also in Bedburg appeared as eyewitnesses and claimed that they had seen a werewolf again and again. Such eyewitness reports were nothing special at that time, because at that time the belief in werewolves was widespread. This gave rise to a legend, namely that residents caught the animal one night and chopped off one of its paws, after which Peter Stump or Peter Trump, respectively, was missing a hand the next day, and was thus reviled and imprisoned as the werewolf of Bedburg, and also as a serial killer, murderer, and eater of his own son, as well as a daughter rapist and a man-eater. The fact that he was then also accused, and then, like his relative Katerina Trump, who had been at his beck and call, subjected to cruel torture, and then executed by beheading and burning at the stake, after he, Stump or Trump, had confessed to all criminal deeds as a result of the torture on the 31st of October, 1589, as was also the case with regard to his relative mistress, Katerina Trump. These are the facts that I have been able to fathom in the past.
Thanks, since you pointed out to me that this story is also listed on the internet. I searched around a bit, as already mentioned, and found the following concerning this Peter Stump alias Peter Trump. Although apparently at that time in the 16th century, nothing was known of the real connections concerning the family father Stump and the Trump daughter from Karlstadt, who together fathered and gave birth to the illegitimate son Peter Stump or Peter Trump. Apparently the only thing known was that there was a liaison between him and Katerina Trump, who was called a devil's wife or something, and was also executed. I have now found a few things on the internet, but I will only list these two excerpts here.
Wikipedia, an account by Lucas Mayer. 1589 Peter Stump *, 1525, the 31st of October 1589 in Bedburg, called Stube Peter, committed at least 16 murders, rapes and incest over a period of 25 years in the guise of a werewolf. He was also accused of sorcery and living with a she-devil. Found guilty on the 28th of October 1589, he was executed a few days later by wheeling and beheading. His body was subsequently burned. There are about 250 werewolf trials documented in literature from the period between 1423 and 1720. This case even attracted attention in the Netherlands, England, and Denmark in 1590s. Its deeds and execution were depicted in copper engravings. The case is mainly handed down through these foreign publications. The records of this witch trial have not survived. The contemporary sources and pamphlets all speak of Stump being judged. The Ergicht is explicitly mentioned. Note Billy. The Ergicht corresponded to an old term no longer used today, meaning the confession of a wrongdoer which he confesses under torture. The simple Gicht, from Gehan, that is to say confess, has long been obsolete and is therefore no longer in use. In memory of this case, the werewolf in this area is still called Stup. The Bedburg Erft Werewolf Hiking Trail provides information about the life and death of Peter Stubb at 7 stations. Wikipedia Bedburg. Darker the forests around Bedburg, lonely, eerie. Wolves live here, and a creature that is more cruel than any wild animal, a werewolf. It is said to kill 25 human beings, eat their flesh. Wolves and werewolves do not exist in the Rheinerf district? Yes, there were more than 400 years ago. In addition to wild animals, a mentally ill farmer disguised as a beast is said to have terrified the entire Rhineland. We set out to track down the man who became known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. His case was even known in London, and as far away as Cologne, people did not dare go out into the forest without an escort in the 80s of the 16th century. No one wanted to meet him. Him, the Werewolf of Bedburg. We want to get closer to him. With Bedburg's town archivist Uwe Depschik, we set off on the werewolf trail and also into another time. Farmer Peter Stube, also called Peter Stump or Stup from Eprath, is wealthy but a little strange. There are rumors of a mysterious illness. When his wife dies, it seems to get worse. Peter has a close relative, Katharina Stump, come to his farm. This naturally fueled rumors in the small village, says town archivist Depschik. There is quickly talk of incest, of witchcraft. We are looking at the Kasterer Hohe, where Stube's farm stood. The almost 10-kilometer-long werewolf trail in Bedburg starting point in Bedburg Alt-Kaster comprises 7 stations. If you want to walk in Stubb's footsteps, you should plan on 2 hours. At the time, witnesses reported spotting a figure among the trees. The rumor mill continues to bubble. When daughter Sibylla becomes pregnant, everyone is sure Peter must have fathered the child. Stubb's son disappears and the farmer is said to have eaten him. Is it all just bad gossip? When witnesses again report seeing a beast, the townspeople march through the forest with their dogs to Lake Castor. They trap the alleged werewolf, cut off one of its paws, and the creature flees. When they arrive at Stube's farm, Peter is missing a hand. With city archivist Uwe Depschik, we cross the Aprather Bridge. Peter Stump also had to cross it tied up. The hunters claim to have found a wolfskin belt on him that gives him the power to turn into the werewolf. The gloomy atmosphere of the area back then naturally stimulated the imagination, explains Depschik as he stops at the imposing Bedburg Castle. This is where Stubb was subjected to an embarrassing interrogation in 1589, he says. Embarrassing in this case comes from torment because what followed was a torture ordeal. Stubbe confesses 25 murders, a pact with the devil, fornication. Whether he actually did it, we will never know. It is irrelevant for the creation of legends. What happens on the Earfthalbensel is anything but legend. On the 31st of October 1589, Stubb's daughter and his relative Katerina are burned at the stake. Stubb was beaten alive, after which his head was cut off, Depschik reports. This horror story leaves you breathless, perhaps also because 10 kilometers of the werewolf trail lie behind you. There is also a legend about this. The Stubb is said to sit on the backs of his victims here and let himself be carried until they are exhausted. So this is how every hiker encounters the werewolf of Bedburg.
So I found these Wikipedia excerpts among others on the internet, and they say more or less what you also said about an earlier personality of Trump who lived in the 16th century. And as has been said, of course this cannot be used to draw direct conclusions about the Trump personality of today, but certain of his characteristics and morality can be linked to the personality of that time. And what today's presidential oaf Trump's personality lets loose could, in the worst case, really lead to a new world conflagration, which, however, he can neither foresee nor effectively realize in his stupidity and thoughtlessness, which is why he rampages around like an imbecilic idiot, driving the USA crazy with his nonsensical agitation against Russia and Putin, as well as the Russian people and the whole world crazy with his irresponsibility. That with his Russia baiting, he is well on the way to inciting not only the USA itself, but also all the states that are in bondage to the USA, as well as the EU dictatorship and even NATO, to be suggestively hostile to Russia and to train them all like USA-supporting whimpering dogs, so that one day they will go weaponized against Russia and Putin like rabid wolves and unleash another and moreover nuclear world war. Neither this idiot himself nor all his American dumbass followers, as well as all the USA-dependent states slobbering on the butt of the glorious US America, do not grasp this.
Unfortunately, however, this will be the background to what is already in the offing, because for some time now the false advisors and other influencers around Trump have been exploiting his pathological stupidity to turn him inflammatory against Russia with threats, lies and suspicions, etc., which may well lead to a repercussion for Russia. This could possibly lead to the USA breaking the disarmament treaty, which was signed on the 8th of December 1987 in Washington in the White House by U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev with the INF Treaty, which contained the agreement on the reduction of medium-range weapons in Europe. It was the first disarmament treaty ever to come into being and provided for the abolition of a complete category of weapons. It was also the first tangible result in terms of the policy of détente between East and West. This, however, is now threatened to be destroyed by the stupidity of the U.S. president and to become the threat of a new worldwide war. In the background of the oaf Trump, who in his pathological stupidity and self-importance does not realize that his surrounding false advisors and others who influence him are all anti-Russia and lead him to where they want him to be, namely to incite against Russia and the rest of the world and to create worldwide turmoil so that the USA can find justifications for acts of war. He is neither able to perceive nor understand this. And in fact, as a result of Trump's stupidity and dim-wittedness, everything will turn out the way the destructive, dangerous and scheming, Mephistophelian, vile, devious, and evil-minded advisors and those who otherwise steer him, world domination addicts and Russia haters, etc., hope it will. He then carries out everything according to the will of those who whisper to him without hesitation. And in addition, in his state of defective intellect and lack of ability to reason, he himself devises all kinds of nonsense and reprisals against other states, or measures through which he exercises his personal threats, pressure, and punitive and retaliatory measures, etc., aimed at other states. And he also does this because he feels powerful in his pathological stupidity and wants to bring his might to bear.
So this factual idiocy and the pathological stupidity of Trump could become the origin for the fact that a fourth world war could effectively still come before it will be so far that mankind, as a result of its overpopulation idiocy and its obtuseness in this regard, will sooner or later cause itself to disappear, which effectively threatens the entire earthly population that has grown to gigantic proportions. A fact that is denied by so-called scientists and other experts on humanity, who also claim that Earth humans can easily bring many billions more human beings into the world, and that the Earth is capable of bearing and coping with these further masses of human beings. This is an unparalleled idiocy, as is also the claim made by a Swiss expert on television about 2 months ago that the total number of farms in Switzerland, of which there are only about 50,000, can feed the country's population, which is currently about 8.7 million, compared to 4.5 million in 1950 if necessary. The Third World War of 1939 to 1945 already proved to the contrary that this was not possible, although there were thousands more farms then than now, but they have since been closed down. At that time, the world population was also much lower than today, Because in 1950, the population statistics counted about 2.5 billion human beings, whereas today, after about 70 years, there are already 8.9 billion, although the population statistics only mention about 7.7 billion, contrary to your very precise Plejaren counts of 8.9 billion. However, it is probably not appropriate to ponder this now, because I am interested in other things, for which I also have a question that relates to what you said about the presidential tramp Trump, namely that his stupidity is pathologically determined. Can you please explain what exactly is meant by that? Because I think that among us Earthlings, it has not yet been defined what stupidity is in general, etc., and what pathological stupidity is.
Already my father's Svath has taught you how. I also know that my father put you in a state which is incomprehensible to me and which drives up a horror in. My thoughts and feelings when I think of what you had to go through and cope with in that way as a youth in order to—
I know, and it was really very bad. Fortunately, I was able to overcome it and become the human being that I have become and also remained. But I would never wish it on any other human being to have to go through the same or a similar procedure, because he could not. As it would also not have been possible for me without the help and teaching of your father Svath. But it was simply not possible in any other way, because without this teaching that I have gone through, I would not know that it is absolutely impossible to teach a human being, who has once been absolutely delusional with regard to humanity, better, let alone to address him in his mind and reason and to want to reach his understanding. But to speak openly about it would probably not be correct. For on the one hand I cannot describe the inner hell, and on the other hand it could not be understood or comprehended by the human beings of Earth. But let's talk about something else. Like the fact that I think you should explain from your point of view what is meant by pathological stupidity, because not all explanations always have to come from me. Besides, I think that in the course of my 100 years, some things are no longer so present to me that I can render them accurately and explain them in the way that your father Svath just could.
I can accept that as an argument and will gladly give an explanation of what pathological stupidity is all about. If effectively only pure stupidity is defined, then this has a form that is always based on a lack of talent in the intellectual field, and thus on a weak and insufficient intelligentsia. Stupidity, however, is also a multifaceted factor that is based on various forms, such as ignorance and also heedlessness, lack of interest, indifference, lack of effort and ignorance, etc., etc. What is to be called pathological stupidity cannot be interpreted in many directions, for this is founded in a pathological and thus pathologically conditioned disability of consciousness, through which truthful things and values, for lack of intelligence, sound understanding, clear reason, knowledge and truth, are perceived only abstractly, partially and thus incompletely with regard to the view and judgment of real reality, are perceived only relatively, or rather from unclear, limited, and incomplete perspectives. The result is that everything concerning validity, reality, correctness, value, reality, and truth is dependent on false perceptions. Thoughts, feelings, views, and prejudices and becomes unclear, and all things and values are judged and expressed inadequately, unobjectively and biasedly, unwise, and with a lack of intelligence. So this means, if I explain it again in a different way, that the truthful things and values of the real reality and the effective truth and their values are not understood in a normal and factually correct way as a result of a blatant lack of intelligence, understanding, and reason, and are consequently judged completely wrongly. Due to the inadequacy and weakness of understanding, reason, and intelligence, the necessary ability of insight is also inevitably lacking, as is the realistic formation of judgment, because the inability to grasp the real connections of the order of what is perceived is also given. As a result, the facts cannot be recognized. and consequently wrong judgments, decisions, and behavior can take place, as well as inevitably wrong, confused, and damaging wrong and often very dangerous decisions, demands, actions, and machinations. Due to the deficient and missing necessary healthy, clear mind, as well as with regard to the missing necessary reason, intelligence, and the lack of a well-founded truthful knowledge, as well as the lack of the necessary wisdom with regard to the view and judgment of the real reality and its truth, everything is only perceived abstractly, partially, and thus incompletely. Everything, therefore, is regarded only relatively, or only within certain limits. From certain points of view and from a certain standpoint, and moreover is misunderstood, is not effectively truthful, and is therefore limited in its validity and in its entire value. Viewed from unclear and thus narrow limits as well as confused points of view, reality and its truth is not effectively clearly grasped and also not understood, whereby everything concerning validity, reality, correctness, value, reality, and truth is impregnated, dependent, and unclearly shaped by false perceptions, assessments, judgments, thoughts, feelings, points of view, and prejudices. As a result, all things and values are perceived inadequately or not in the certain given and effectively real correct framework of the actually existing contexts, as well as not truthfully recognized, not appropriately judged, and not truthfully placed in the correct relationship to the given truth. This is fundamentally because, as a result of ignorance, everything is perceived out of touch with reality and is judged in an illogical manner, confused, unobjective, erroneous and biased, unwise, impaired in understanding and reason, as well as weak in intelligence, and is consequently expressed in an over-hasty, disorderly, exaggerated, and even disturbed manner, verbally and through writing and action, in a dangerous and damaging manner.
Thanks. This explanation was long overdue. Because with regard to pathological stupidity, nothing can be found in all the clever books of earthly sages that I have searched through that would express it as you have just explained it. But just as there are clever books in which nothing sensible is written, nothing of value can be looked up, and therefore nothing can be learned from them. So there are also clever earthlings who think they are great and clever, but who are effectively stupid, primitive, hateful, and vindictive. So it is also with regard to the poor man who is stupid, and thinks he has to finish off Figu and me. This now gives me the reason to talk about what the lunatic is up to, because he continues to make sleazy efforts to denigrate me through lies and slander, and also by writing to authorities. The center of what I have to say is the following. Already during our last conversation on the 11th of September, I said a few things regarding, because the man is harming himself in his primitive hate stupidity. Also because in Germany a group of 36 people wants to publicly pillory him with his name, place of work and home address, etc. I have been able to prevent this so far, however. I have been able to prevent this because is a psychopathic hate-monger and belongs in principle in a sanatorium for the mentally disturbed. Although I doubt that he can be helped in such an institution because he is probably a hopeless case and, as a result of his stupidity, does not realize that he has made an idiot of himself. I would just like to say to him that he is a cheap little show-off with a big mouth and vindictive airs who works in Zurich in the AS, where he is judged as a sneak, arrogant know-it-all and stupid fool, as I have since learned from 2 persons who recently appeared before me and work in the same place as he does, and that he is a person who does not correspond to what he pretends to be and wants to be. For my part, I can understand and comprehend this. Because his intrigue, which he leads full of hatred against me, clearly proves that his intellect, his reason, and his intelligence are very deficient. He is also insane and, moreover, effectively stupid. And he has only built up his hatred and vindictiveness against me because, on the one hand, as a fan of Charles Darwin, he does not want to swallow the fact that he fraudulently filed monkey bones to prove his thesis that human beings are supposed to have descended from monkeys. On the other hand, he is frustrated because his hobby as a fan of Wilhelm Reich with regard to the latter's orgone energy has not gone down well with us and you. Ptah have explained precisely that orgone is fundamentally of a different kind and use than Reich falsely claimed and taught. Well, who as a delusional follower of Reich, who was a student of Freud, who in his sex judgment delusion made his analyses, prognoses and diagnoses etc. according to sexual aspects, put his foot in his mouth with you, Ptah, in his Freudian Reichian sexist judgment, then he changed his first friendly behavior against you. Me and the Figu into hatred and vindictiveness, and since then has been working around with dirty and primitive machinations on the internet and with authorities. The man, that is obsessed with his hatred and vindictiveness, because how else could it be that he could fall prey to a vindictiveness and completely illogically lead an intrigue full of lies, discriminations and insults against me, in public and at offices, with which he tries to humiliate and destroy me with lies and defamations told by my wife and my younger son on the one hand, and also with stories of lies and slander invented by himself on the other hand, through sleazy character assassination. Such a human being is effectively not normal, but mentally disturbed and should be interned in a loony bin. But I have something more to say about this, which I want to mention specifically, because at the center of what I still have to say is the following. In general, it must be said above all, and the question must be asked openly, where Earth humans are actually heading and what it is fundamentally all about. All the attention and diligence that the members of the Figu and I are putting in has attracted the hatred of various adversaries, various religionists and the confused because they, neither want to perceive nor accept the effective reality and its truth. As already explained, the psychopathic who works in Zurich has also been practicing great hatred and vindictiveness for a long time. He has built up hatred and vengefulness within himself because you, Ptah, and I were not willing to be of slimy service to him by not following his hobby with regard to his sex-addled orgone delusion, which he took over from Wilhelm Reich, and also by naming the true story of Darwin with regard to filing monkey bones. Full of hatred and full of revenge, he therefore viciously denigrates me, as well as the Figu and Figu members, on the internet and with the authorities with lies and slander, trying again and again with smeary lies and defamations that he cobbles together from similar or like lies and slander that my ex, who is viciously against me, and my younger son, who is in line with her, tell him. But there are also certain dissatisfied ex-members who, for whatever flimsy, real or indefinable reasons they have left the Figu, also insult the Figu, its members and me on the internet with lies and slander. Also contributing to this are 3 people who are dissatisfied with themselves and who are unclear about themselves, who are not able to realize their desired claims to power in the Figu despite decades of membership, because the entire core group did not get involved. But now, never tires of calling me a sect guru, liar, cheat, woman abuser, money grubber and exploiter etc. via the internet and dragging me, my work and credibility pathetically and without level in his slanderous mud. So he portrays me on the internet and to the authorities as a human being who, in addition to other evil and inhuman activities, allegedly also shamelessly sexually abuses women, thereby bringing them to misfortune and even driving them to suicide. However, this means, even if he has not explicitly mentioned words to this effect, that through his lying and slanderous denigration he wants to create the impression among authorities and on the internet and their readership that I am an unscrupulous monster, mean, rascally, hardened, reprehensible, despicable, nefarious, perfidious, shameless, base and conscienceless, etc., as is also evident from the following extracts from his writing computer, which he has written stupidly primitive, intelligently about face, lying and slanderous to authorities.
In his personality as an autocratic cult leader, Eduard Meyer can certainly be called a public figure. The originally lively media interest in him has more or less died down for years, but the explosive nature of his allegations persists unabated. The sometimes quite intimate insights into the life and the work of Eduard Meyer have confirmed to me that here, once again, the search for meaning in life is shamelessly capitalized on. Numerous human beings, especially also sexually exploited women, were brought to misfortune by Meyer's unscrupulousness, which even led to cases of suicide. Even whole families were torn apart under his manipulative influence. Given these facts, it is obvious that the truth about this man should be made as widely known to the public as possible. As is evident from critical analysis of Meyer's activities in his capacity as a cult leader and confirmed by independent sources such as Billy Meyer UFO Research, Meyer's overriding interests are to lie and deceive his followers and the public through their teeth, and to do his utmost to make life difficult, if not destructive, for the human beings who dare to criticize his claims and machinations. If you wish, I can enclose affidavits from those affected whose lives have suffered severely as a result of Meyer's inhumane treatment and his intrigues and slanders. What others have experienced with Meyer, I can also confirm from my own experience. By referring to his hair-raising statements about my wisely unnamed personality in his publications. The problem now is that Edward Meyer decidedly opposes my efforts to clarify his personality. After I offered him to include his view of things in my project with a possible rebuttal, I received an expected rejection on 7.2. 18. In which Mr. Meyer simply called me a liar. See Appendix 3. About a month later, on 10.3. 18. A preemptive strike against my project followed in one of the FIGU bulletins, Zeitzeichen number 89. It is an extract from a so-called contact conversation with Ptah, Edward Meyer's most important extraterrestrial contact person. The content of this alleged contact extract undoubtedly throws a striking light on the questionable character of Edward Meyer. In addition, I hope to be able to credibly demonstrate that, due to the sectarian problem, there is also a justified public interest here, which would additionally justify disclosure. For a more detailed justification of a public interest in the clarification of Edward Meyer's personality, I add the following explanations. In addition to the above findings, my inquiries at InfoSecta, the Specialist Center for Sectarian Issues, have shown that the FIGU is the subject of various inquiries there, partly from people seeking help themselves, which point to the obvious sectarian character of the association. So here too, for reasons of consumer protection, so to speak, there is definitely a public interest in clarification about the person of Edward Meyer. I now hope that these explanations will provide me with the desired access to information. Should you require further information on my project for your decision-making, I will be happy to assist you. I would also like to know by when I can expect an answer to my application. In the course of my personal research on the alleged UFO contactor Billy Edward Albert Meyer, I received the information. In addition, you might also have material on a longtime follower of Billy Meyer. For a good year, I have been intensively engaged in a clarification project about Billy Meyer, as he commonly calls himself, and his association FEGU, Freie Interessengemeinschaft für Grenz- und Geisteswissenschaften und Ufologiestudien. I intend to publish the results of my research and analysis on my own website. In the course of my research in the archives, I have come across both the person Edward Albert Meyer and the personality Billy Meyer's story is probably the most sensational and comprehensively documented case of UFO research. Even after more than 40 years, since Billy Meyer went public in January 1975, the case is still controversial and still not clearly explained. Above all, there is a lack of independent witness and evidence. The About Edward Albert Meyer and could contain valuable information material and thus decisively promote the clarification of the case. Moreover, contrary to the pretended appearance of freedom and self-thinking, the FIGU is clearly a sect-like, indoctrinating organization that does not tolerate criticism and is led by Meyer's manipulative authority. It is unmistakable that Meyer suppresses independent thinking and the independent formation of opinion among his followers through the so-called spiritual doctrine that he dogmatically spreads. Furthermore, based on my research so far, it is clearly proven that Meyer, in his guru-like position, unscrupulously exploits the gullibility of his followers, and that his machinations are dominantly guided by sex, money, and power interests. One example that offers an unparalleled insight into the disturbed personality of Billy Meyer is his desperate attempt to discredit me about his person and mission in advance of my venture, etc.
What is hidden behind Billy Meyer UFO research? We have already talked about earlier, because this is Mahesh Karamudi, who is trying to destroy me and the FIGU on the internet with lies and slander, as Cal Korff has already tried to do for the same motive and is now also trying to do it with lies and deceit, whereby, as always, my vengeful and lying ex is also involved, as is also my younger son, who in the past, together with the editor-in-chief Michael Hesseman, openly told the effective truth at a UFO conference in Laughlin, USA, and in Magazine 2000, and also spoke about it on the internet. As to what the correctness and truth of my contacts, etc. really was, is, and corresponds to. Really was, is, and corresponds to. In doing so, he also drags a passive member from Winterthur, who is already in his old age, into the mud, namely, later, when my younger son, who had first cut himself off from his mother, and as a result of the injustices and educational injustices suffered by her in his youth, broke away from the order of correct behavior, for years fundamentally did not want to know anything more about his mother, but was finally taken in again by his mother when she was able to convince him that I and the FIGU members were the culprits. He made up with her again for financial reasons. So he changed his mind again, and since then he has been insulting me in such a way that it was not his mother, but I and also the FIGU members who had treated him miserably in his childhood. And the fact that Mahesh Karamudi, with his Billy Meyer UFO research in cooperation with my ex and also with my younger son, functions hatefully with lies and slander, is based on the fact that I did not accept his request to cooperate with him and to answer his questions for his plans, so that he could have stood out as a Billy Meyer story connoisseur. Also, Cal Korff built up hatred against me in the same way. Only this happened back then when he wanted to come to me from the USA with Wendell Stevens as a youngster, but had to be refused according to some US law, which led to hatred against me, and he consequently began to work viciously with suspicions, lies, and slander against me everywhere. And equally so now does, precisely because you, Ptah, and I were unwilling to be of service to him in relation to Reich, to confirm his Reich hobby as correct. Precisely that we should have represented a correctness of Reich's orgone sex fantasy as correct.
That an Earth human being should degenerate in this primitive way, for this I really must use the term primitive. As you do in such cases, I could not understand that before, and I cannot understand it now. Since you recently judged the man to be a psychopath, I felt urged to find out whether your judgment was correct, which is why I made an effort to find out more about his personality and found that you had judged his inner psychotic being to be correct. For my part, I have diagnosed the following is undoubtedly a psychopath whose personality trait consists of various very negative character traits. As an educated psychiatrist, I am absolutely predestined to correctly diagnose and assess the psychopathic disposition of this delusional man and to determine that he is driven by an extremely exaggerated pathological self-confidence and by an extremely strong egoism, that he has a pathologically exaggerated false self-confidence, and that he also exaggerates his few good abilities to an extreme, which, however, has a very negative effect on his fellow human beings with regard to an assessment of his personality. This alone confirms that he is judged by coworkers, as you mentioned, as a lurker, etc. In the delusion of his psychopathy, it is impossible for him to empathize with the emotional world of a fellow human being, because fundamentally his interests are directed solely towards and shaped by his own needs. But he also tries to achieve these self-needs by using psychic violence, namely by manipulating his fellow human beings suggestively according to his meaning by acting out a false arousal of interest in them, which he concentrates on to a particular degree. If, however, someone does not get involved, contradicts him or tells him the truth, then he regards this as an attack on his person or his actions, etc., as a result of which he reacts against it with mood swings and hatred, as well as with thoughts and behavior in a vengeful way, namely because he very quickly loses all control with regard to intellect and reason, which also has a disturbing effect on his intelligence, which on the one hand he severely lacks, but on the other hand, the little he has in this respect cannot be used by him intellectually and rationally. As a delusional psychopath, he suffers from a strong lack of empathy, which is why he focuses very strongly on his pathological ambition and on his extremely exaggerated self-confidence and egoism in order to achieve his goals. In his psychopathic delusion, he lives in various personality traits and in a web of the most diverse, confused character traits, through which he can also lapse uncontrollably from one mood to another, from one moment to the next, which makes him act in this extreme way. With all his psychopathic behavior, lies and defamation are also always present in him, which he upholds in his pathological ambition and champions against all resistance when it is a question of realizing his aims with them. Overall, he is characterized by various behaviors that express his distinct psychopathic disposition.
My assessment was also similar, but not as profound as your diagnosis and assessment. But I think that the stupidity and all the factors of psychopathy are so deep-seated that he will not comprehend what is actually fact in him in the manner mentioned.
That will be so, for it is without any doubt the case that he is as absolutely incapable of self-judgment as he is incapable of recognizing what psychopathic symptoms he is suffering from.
So basically a deplorable psychopathic lunatic, whom I will not oppose either. Because how can one help a lunatic if he is not even capable of taking in anything intelligently and reasonably, and consequently is also not capable of thinking about relevant, important facts about himself? Because there is also a lack of intelligence. So I will behave accordingly and do nothing against him. The man is obviously extremely fickle and not the master of his own senses, just as he also has no personal opinion, capacity for judgment and evaluation, and therefore simply talks according to other people's mouths and their opinions. And furthermore, he is a human being who cannot control his own thoughts and feelings, but lets them run wild and swirl around, which is why everything is then made a tangled mess in him. So it is quite clear that he is dependent on very short-lived momentary moods, which he has adopted with the sex therapy theory of Sigmund Freud and his disciple Wilhelm Reich, and constantly cannibalizes in himself in order to use them to rake his environment and judge it wrongly. He uses Reich's sexual analysis in a fanatical way, and on the one hand judges his fellow human beings according to this sexual therapy theory adopted from Freud and Reich. This also proved to be the case when he came to the center and sought contact with us after he had got hold of various writings and books from my pen in connection with his daily work, and then later, after about a year, began to hatefully abuse them in his psychopathic impulses for his own purposes vindictively against the Figu and me, and continues to do so to this day. Bernadette and I talked with him for the first time for about 2 hours, if one could speak of a conversation at all, because as a rule only he talked and clothed everything and anything in his sex analytics, as a result of which actually only he was the great speaker and entertainer, whose overriding theme was of a sexual nature. But it is also to be said that he is undoubtedly often and uncontrollably disturbed in his consciousness, just as he clearly also has the most serious memory difficulties and a morally and psychologically disturbed inner world. For how else could it be? That he once exalts something to the highest holy heights, but then, when his wishes regarding his hobbies and views, wavering opinions, and his fanatical behavior are not met, he reacts with hatred, revenge, and viciously lying and slandering absolutely counteractively. And with the new campaign of lies and slander directed against me, the whole of stands in a strange light of his despair. For his actions are based solely in his psychopathic hatred and in his equally psychopathic need for revenge, as well as in behavior in this regard, which he cannot satisfy. And this is an indisputable fact that can be proven in black and white, because contrary to all the sleazy lies, self-invented accusations and slander that he has been spreading for about a year at offices in Switzerland and on the internet, and which he allegedly wants to prove by sworn testimonies, the man, who is actually to be greatly pitied because of his stupidity, published about 3 years ago, among other things, the following assessments concerning the Figu and my person in a Figu bulletin, before the very thing happened that he was told the truth concerning Darwin and that you, Ptah, did not answer further questions about the findings of the matter with Wilhelm Reich and his sexual orgone theory. That is why he is acting in such a way today by calling me a liar, exploiter, sexist and money grubber, etc., and also wants to discredit me as a sect guru, which my ex and my younger son are helping him to do with the same lies and slanders, etc. So, wrote the following, among other things, which was also published at the time and whose assessment, etc., is exactly the opposite of the lies, allegations and slander he is spreading today, with which he is trying to push me into the ground and make me impossible. And he does this, although some time ago he used completely different words and presented a completely different presentation with regard to me and the Figu, as the following excerpts of his letters and articles prove, through which he punishes himself as a liar and slanderer and robs himself of his own credibility. Which, however, in his wretchedness, ridiculousness, and stupidity, he will neither recognize nor understand.
Dear Bernadette, the picture is well taken and shows Billy in his manifold humanity. Thank you. Unfortunately, I was not able to greet Eva in person, but perhaps that can be made up for later. First of all, I enjoyed the natural and warm atmosphere of the center yesterday. What you have built up over years of hard work and what you cherish and care for is simply phenomenal. For that reason alone, I would love to visit you again and again. But then it was especially the closer encounter with you and Billy that touched me deeply through your open and direct manner. Beyond the purely personal aspects, an important distinction has also become clear to me in the course of yesterday's conversation. Billy has quite convincingly emphasized the importance of the mass appeal of his writings and those of the Figu. It is therefore understandable if he does not want to disturb the integrity of the spiritual doctrine with extraneous contextual elements and water it down with academic and perhaps intellectually pompous additions. It thus seems necessary to drive on two tracks, so to speak, in that the intellectual circles drive on their own track with their claims. By the way, the traditional academic world and cold intellectualism are anathema to me anyway. But I also feel that the intellectual clientele should be catered for, which is why I am trying to jump into the breach with my efforts here. My personal encounter with Billy has fully confirmed the image conveyed by his writings and his appearances in films and interviews. In his capacity as a prophet of the modern age, he fulfills the all-important task of a leadership, which is exactly the opposite of being a leader. Mass psychology teaches us over and over again that the masses are always influenced and steered by the leaders who suit them, who correspond to their misguided demands and longings. Finney, in his charismatic charisma and in the cause he exemplifies, involuntarily embodies a type of leader who does not manipulatively direct human beings, but inspires and motivates them to self-direction through the example of his life and work. In this sense, he fulfills exactly those conditions that define the new leaders according to Rai in his book Christus Maud. The new leader will be able to console himself somewhat by his conviction that truth and that which is beneficial to human beings will necessarily prevail, even if only in 1,000,000 years. He will continue to do nothing for the human beings, but simply do his work, a good work. He will let the human beings save themselves. He will know that no one can do that for them. He will simply live ahead of the human beings and leave it up to them whether they join him or not. He will be more of an advisor than a guide. A mountain guide also only tells you how to reach a peak safely. He does not determine which mountain the hiker will climb. The new leader may already be leading a whole world without himself knowing it or without the world being aware of being led by that leader. Christ was such a leader. The way the new leader lives, his ideas, his behavior and his goals may already have penetrated far into the public consciousness without anyone even noticing. He may yet be accused of distortions of his teachings by others, or of misdeeds he never advocated. He feels responsible, not for human beings, but for what is going on in the world, just as every citizen of the world feels responsible for world events. This, too, is a hallmark of the new leadership, the sense of responsibility of every citizen of the world for everything that happens in the world, even in its most remote parts. The blathering, pandering, slandering, joke-taking, pornographic empty sack of an irresponsible citizen of a free country is a thing of the past, that much is certain. Wilhelm Reich, Christus Maud. Alton 1978, p. 376 f. Somehow I am not entirely comfortable with Billy Tara's quasi-endeavor under someone else's pretext. On the other hand, with this slight approach it could be quite interesting for the Earth scientific circles of the Pleiadian to learn about the other spiritual teaching of purely earthly origin or to find out more. As I said, I do not want to claim any extra sausage here, but I think that in this matter both sides could possibly benefit in terms of knowledge. Of course, there was not enough time yesterday to clarify all the questions. And as it is, old questions give rise to new ones of course. I would be happy if we could continue our conversations at another meeting from time to time. And in between, a short exchange of ideas via email is also sufficient. Unfortunately, in the fire of the conversation with Billy yesterday, I did not get a chance to also exchange a few words with Elizabeth. But that too can be made up for at some point. In any case, I send her my best regards. I am now eagerly awaiting the things that will hopefully result from Billy's next contact. All the best and best wishes also to Billy. Switzerland. Introductory words of the author to Things to Come. The following contribution was written by me as. However, its content is addressed to any potentially interested reader. The topic Billy gave me the opportunity to draw attention to some of my hobby horses at the same time, Wilhelm Reich, Max Stirner, and, somewhat off-topic, Karl Marx. But it all came together quite well. As was to be feared, the article was also promptly rejected by the responsible editors on flimsy grounds. The real reasons for this rejection are anyone's guess. Not least, the negative decision reflects exactly the mass character of the social consensus that is both openly and implicitly pilloried in the text. No wonder, then, that this Gedenkengemeindeis is badly received. It is particularly thought-provoking that a library, of all places, the institutional place of education and knowledge per se, closes itself off to the free formation of opinion. The reading appetizer was predestined to fail from the start due to the unhealthy lack of appetite of its intended readership. Nevertheless, it was worth a try, especially since the Figu then jumped into the gap, so to speak. The whole affair confirms on a small scale what is becoming increasingly fatal on a large scale, the totalitarian tendency of a dictatorship of opinion. More and more we are approaching conditions that are reminiscent, in the broadest sense, of brown or red the times, and which are paradoxically and also sensibly being sought under the pretext of a determined defense against them. A new form of fascist thinking, a leveling under a pseudo-liberal banner, threatens to level the individual human being into a uniform human being, sometimes gendered. The main culprit of an indifferent mass, which allows itself to be bullied and slaughtered without resistance by the secondary perpetrators of an ideologically fuddled pseudo-elite, is, as always, the tipping point in frightening developments of this kind. However, dictatorship of opinion and the associated pseudo-liberal tendencies are only the tip of the iceberg underneath. In the deeper biological layers lies what I called contactlessness in the text. According to Wilhelm Reich, everything boils down to human beings fleeing their biological, creational natural reality. When I sent the contribution to the Figu Central Library for review before submitting it, it was not only greeted with appreciative words despite the critical undertone, but I was also immediately suggested as a possible enrichment of a future issue of the Figu Special Bulletin. It is therefore all the more gratifying to me if my controversial seed of thought finds a worthy audience after all. Many thanks to the entire Figu, but especially to Bernadette Brand and Billy. Switzerland.
Things to Come. The Distant Future is written in the Zurich Highlands. Love, work and knowledge are the sources of our life. You should also determine it. Wilhelm Reich.
Andrea dated the 17th of February 2017, and Billy with a squirrel text. 2018.
In Slumbers, the almost complete literature of the Free Interest Group for Frontier and Human Sciences and Ufology Studies Figu, which is located in Schmidruti, more precisely Hinterschmidruti, a hamlet of Turbenthal, and modestly, seemingly inconspicuously, seeks to spread the silent revolution of truth. Appearances are very deceptive. Although the programmatic tenor of the association revolves around the relevant terminology of borderline science and esotericism, an unbiased examination quickly shows that the spontaneous suspicion of a cult is unjustified, because there is much more behind the Figu than alleged esoteric nonsense. The purpose of the association is the dissemination of the more than 9.6 billion, 9,600,000,000 year-old spiritual teachings, supposedly first put down in writing, which were imparted or transmitted to Billy Edward Albert Meyer, the prophet of the modern age, specially chosen for this mission, via physical and telepathic contacts with the extraterrestrial Plejaren and so-called pure spirit planes, and supplemented by his own additions. But before one risks a heart attack in a fit of laughter or throws in the towel shaking one's head, a closer, genuinely skeptical look at the case of Billy Meyer might well be worthwhile. The volume Photo Inventarium 3, for example, provides a wealth of very thought-provoking empirical evidence and circumstantial proof that cannot be dismissed out of hand by any stretch of the imagination. The documentary film Contact, 1982, for example, is also sensational in this respect. Once one is familiar with the objective facts, the countless attempts circulating in skeptic circles to accuse Billy of fraud, falsification, and charlatanism can be thrown to the wind. Many issues, however, are based on pure factual assertions, are not verifiable, thus elude empirical testing, and, if only deductively obtained from the existing empirical data, cannot help to achieve certainty, but can at least be relatively convincing. According to this state of knowledge, a certain residual doubt remains, but this does not exclude that the phenomenon Billy Meyer is most probably true. Interestingly enough, despite this critically restrictive conclusion, I always ignore this residual doubt as a matter of course, because the whole edifice of this phenomenon intuitively and spontaneously seems to me to be built on solid foundations, as if solidly constructed from a single mold. My objections are therefore more of a philosophical nature and apply to the theory of mind, whose ideological or religious problems I can only touch upon on this occasion. In essence, the doctrine of the spirit describes how one aligns one's thoughts, feelings, and actions according to creational natural laws and recommendations. The more consistently this is done, the faster the evolutionary process of the spirit form, which animates the body and represents a tiny piece of the spirit of creation, proceeds over countless incarnations. As soon as the spirit form has perfected itself into the pure spirit form, it gives up its sequence of incarnations, continues to evolve, and finally merges with creation, reaching its goal. Quite obviously, the cosmic longing of unification mysticism is fulfilled here, whereby this unio mystica sympathetically does not take place with a purely anthropomorphic creator god, but atheistically with the anonymous, genderless, and yet involuntarily female connoted creation. The abstract philosophical description of cosmic longing bears no comparison to its artistic representation. What defines art is that it brings us into contact with the core of our lives. This shows how little real art there is. If art in its deepest moments is able to stir up our inner life with a maximum of emotional gestalt, then it has also fulfilled its special, namely cathartic purpose. Perhaps the most important emotion after lust, longing, is expressed in an exemplary way in Gustav Mahler's Eighth Symphony, for example, thanks to the high emotional power of music. Or an example from the emotionally equally powerful suggestive world of film. I know of no other film that conveys the fulfillment of cosmic longing in such a touching way as the end of the film The Elephant Man, USA, 1980, David Lynch, Signature. DVD vid 1064, which is accompanied by Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings. In general, this film is a cinematic stroke of luck, because it succeeds in telling a dramatically particularly grateful passion story, in a rarely haunting and empathetic, cinematically adequate way. Great art. What makes the spiritual doctrine particularly fascinating is its physical, energetic, spiritual basis and the propagation of a life secundum naturam. The meaning of according to nature in this context, however, is dubious insofar as it moves within the escapist boundaries of those creator natural laws and recommendations that an extraterrestrial humanity plagued by fear of life defined ages ago. Then, as now, human beings try to confront the human condition and mortality in particular, with the metaphysical need and the irrational religious search for meaning inherent in it. The spiritual doctrine, which is both reconnectingly religious and reconnectingly religious, jumps here into a gap beyond traditional and institutional religion as well as the Privatrali Jaya special path. Those who live in trusting, self-responsible devotion to the creational natural laws and recommendations are certain of the salvation of love, peace, freedom, and harmony. Everything that cosmic longing desires is ultimately fulfilled in the motherly womb of creation. One could not wish for a more beautiful promise of salvation. Christian soteriology looks poor in comparison. In many cases, the Figu's literature presents itself as a panopticon of the paranormal. Practically the entire catalogue of the inexplicable finds its way into it, and often also a plausible explanation, which one looks for in vain elsewhere. In particular, the Pleiadian-Plejaran contact reports shelf mark GGN 10750 1-13 are sometimes of gripping, almost cinematic drama, and sometimes seduce one into an incomparable voyage of discovery into the world of the people of the same name who live in the star system of the Plejaran, which is unknown to us and who are ahead of us in technical terms by about 12,000 years, and in terms of consciousness or evolution by a legendary 20 to 30 million years. It would be highly interesting to critically assess the theory of mind against the background of Wilhelm Reich's orgonomy and Max Stirner's philosophical egoism. Due to their radically emancipatory thinking, these two para-philosophical eccentrics are considered the philosophical non-persons of their respective centuries, because they brought the Enlightenment's mechano-mystical direction to largely ignored perfection. At this point, I would also like to take up the cudgels for a third in the group, Karl Marx. Both historical and dialectical materialism, and still the most profound analysis of capitalism, arguably this most complicated, sophisticated, and perfidious ideology of all time, have fallen shamefully behind in the wake of the failed socialism experiments of the 20th century. However, the lesson of the Red Holocaust, the greatest social catastrophe in known history, should not stand in the way of a Marx Renaissance urgently needed today, oriented towards Stirner's association of egoists and Wilhelm Reich's labor democratic model. With the philosophical pariahs Stirner and Reich and the red rag Marx Engels included, I have at least managed to smuggle a touch of healthy subversion into this reading appetizer. Joy reigns. If Billy's and the Figu's silent revolutionary mission should prove to be true, and so far nothing seriously speaks against it, one could, without exaggeration, casually speak of the probably greatest sensation of all times, the historical ne plus ultra. Even to speak of a second Copernican turn would be an understatement, for it is the turn par excellence that is supposed to prevail in a little less than 800 years. The skeptical rejection, hypocrisy, and indifference towards this turning point is only practically universal because the accustomed worldview, or quite simply the comfortable life of a humanity sitting on its haunches, would be almost completely thrown off course by it. According to the present state of objective critical observation, Billy's and the Figu's mission stands on the foundation of credibility, and it seems that in the long run, no one will be able to seriously close his mind to the fact of this germinating and one day flourishing revolution. One could wish nothing better for our unspeakably dysfunctional times, whose human beings are alienated from their biological reality, the grace and goodness of the core of life, the creation in human beings, than a turn that takes the natural path. Nevertheless, mixed into this utopia is a dystopian drop of bitterness, in view of the unprecedented scientific and intellectual achievement of the naturalist Wilhelm Reich. It is, in my opinion, justifiable to recognize in him the greatest visionary in the at least earthly history of ideas. especially since he, with the radically biological primacy of his doctrine, is ahead of every time. And precisely for this reason, his legacy will paradoxically, or more sensibly, never bear the required fruit, because the future seems to belong to the spiritual version of this doctrine of his. In view of this admittedly sad perspective, I can nevertheless only hope that humanity will adopt the spiritual doctrine before its massively overpopulated and ominously dying planet, this pulsating, originally paradisiacally beautiful jewel of life in the cold universe, finally collapses under the weight of its destructive goings-on. The history of this catastrophe sphere, this slaughterhouse planet, and the seemingly insurmountable neurotic mass structure of a therapy-resistant humanity responsible for it, meanwhile, speak to a deep anthropological pessimism and make this hope shrink hopelessly. Like Stirner in his notorious Hostian Killer, I dismiss the present seed of thought with an appeal to self-thinking. Do with it what you will and can, that is your business, and I do not care.
All this really shows what you said to me the other day about this man with the words, namely, whose subdued mind, what inferior reason and what lack of intelligence this man is. What you should now do once again, however, is to provide further and continuing clarification to all FIGU members, to those who are friendly to the FIGU and to you, and to the extensive FIGU readership worldwide, which is large in number. With all the recent lies and slandering of this, who is talking in a crazy and confused way, I must say that it has become inevitable to make all the machinations of this stupid, psychopathically sick human being, which are appearing in relation to this campaign of lies and slandering against you, known worldwide, so that all FIGU members and all those who are friendly to FIGU and the rest of the worldwide FIGU readership are informed.
If you think that this is correct, good and necessary, then I will do it and put something together, but I really do not like to do that. Because such a mad and confused consciousness-sick person cannot be helped by openly calling his bullshit, because he is too stupid and dumb to recognize his personal inferiority in this respect. But if I think about it for a moment, then yes, I could perhaps formulate it that way and say something, for example, if I choose the following title and write a few things about it, and then append what is necessary.
On my own behalf, which needs publicity controversy by antagonists, secret services, as well as a campaign of lies and slander out of hatred and vindictiveness by stupidity and simple-mindedness.
On my own behalf, I, Billy Edward Albert Meyer, Billy Edward A. Meyer, would like to inform all our association members that for some time now a controversy has again been waged against me and the FIGU, and therefore also against all FIGU members. All FIGU members, as well as the whole public, should know what sleazy intrigue is again going on against me, the FIGU and the FIGU members, because it is the right of all of them to be informed about everything. This is the second controversy that has erupted since the 1970s. But what is now being mentioned does not belong to the controversy itself, but is separate from it and corresponds to a viciously smeary campaign of lies and slander by the unfortunate, hateful, and vindictive man. He is a pathologically stupid simpleton from Dietikon ZH, who, together with my divorced former wife and my younger son, as well as with Mahesh Karumudi, is trying to spread the lies and defamations told to him on the internet, in addition to the fact that he himself also invents and spreads dirty and primitive lies and defamations, even with the authorities, etc. Due to the whole of his dirty machinations, I now find it necessary to inform our FIGU members and the rest of the worldwide readership, who are friendly to the FIGU, about the existing facts. In doing so, I am in no way interested in spreading any hate speech or vindictive sentiments on my part, but only in providing the necessary information. And for this purpose, I am also using excerpts of conversations that took place between the Plejaren Ptah and myself.
You can implement that as it is, but I will still give you some instructions in private after our official conversation as to how you should arrange everything.
Then I have this question. Can you tell me what your play-yarn facts have to say with regard to the pending framework agreement between Switzerland and the EU dictatorship? Since you not only observe but also judge and evaluate our earthly political affairs. And this you do indeed only for reasons of observation and evaluation, without interfering yourselves in any such matters of earthly states, because this is not allowed to you by your directives. But I find that it can be important for the earthlings what all you learn in this respect, and which evaluations you gain from our earthly political machinations, etc.
That is correct, because I am not allowed by our directives to interfere in the politics of Switzerland or other earthly states. But may I answer your question by revealing my thoughts and explaining that I personally recognize the framework agreement between the EU dictatorship, and it undoubtedly corresponds to such a dictatorship in Switzerland a long time ago as an EU dictatorial underhandedness, by which Switzerland's democracy is ultimately to be undermined, dissolved, and the country ultimately integrated into the dictatorship of the EU, as has been the case since the time when the first negotiations and treaties between Switzerland and the EU dictatorship, which I cannot call anything else, came into being. Switzerland's clueless negotiators and plenipotentiaries have committed their freedom to the EU totalitarian system in many ways. This has inevitably led to a certain vassalage of Switzerland to the EU dictatorship, into which the once comprehensively free country has willingly inserted itself contrary to its constitution, against all reason and against the will of that part of the Swiss people who did not want to do so. So it turned out that those responsible, clueless Swiss representatives, who conducted the negotiations with the EU dictatorship and who made the agreements, stupidly, credulously, and trustingly did everything they could to ensure that Switzerland was gradually incorporated into various orders, laws and demands, etc., and obliged to comply with the freedom-hostile dictatorship rules of the EU by means of corresponding agreements, as a result of which the Swiss Confederation became dependent on this coercive rule, was pressed into its dictatorial regulations, and thus already became unfree in various respects.
Thanks. I also have something on this from a person with whom I have been in contact for several years, and who is very interested in our cause of mission, as is also the case, as you know, of the government official from in Germany, who used to come here when Guido was still alive, and whose name I have to conceal at least as long as he is still alive, as was also the case with Franz Josef Strauss. Although contact has slackened somewhat since Guido died, he is still interested in the mission and also goes along with it. Although he is actually a human being who believes in God, although he says that he can integrate the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of the life extensively into his faith. The person, however, whom I first addressed, well, you know it too, is a member of the 732 elected MEPs from the European Parliament EP, and provides me now, and then with some information that is not publicly negotiated and kept secret in the EU Parliament. I was not supposed to speak openly about this, but I was allowed, if I remain within the bounds of secrecy regarding the name of the person and the position and say nothing, to mention this and to disclose some of what was explained to me. This, however, really only if and with the promise that I do not mention the name of the person in question, and also that certain details of his or her activity in the EU dictatorship remain undisclosed, which of course I have committed myself to do, as a consequence of which I am also not allowed to say in our core group who the person is, and what his or her activity in the EU dictatorship is. Therefore, I can now also say what she sent me 4 days ago, as you can see here by the date, and which you can read yourself, after which I must destroy the whole thing. Transcript, with the planned framework treaty between Switzerland and the European Union, which really corresponds to a dictatorship, as you say, and for which I am unfortunately forced to work. The Swiss people as a whole are being cheated and deceived by all those who drew up the treaty and by the Swiss negotiators, as well as by all the ignorant, unreasonable Swiss supporters of this treaty. In addition, Switzerland's constitution is being severely compromised by this framework treaty. as well as by other treaties, and its freedom and right of self-determination and self-decision are being increasingly restricted, as is its neutrality. Basically, the Union dictatorship is working towards binding Switzerland by treaties in such a way that it will eventually be deprived of all its libertarian rights and can be incorporated into the European Union.
That this person has been in contact with you for a number of years and you have kept quiet about it so far. As well as regarding the two state officials from Switzerland, I am aware of that. But you really have to keep quiet about their identities and also destroy this.
It is clear, but you do not think we should not talk about it officially, and therefore I should omit what was said when I retrieved the report of the conversation.
That will not be necessary, because we did not mention any names or positions of office. Whereas I also think that certain people should know and be concerned about the fact that state officials in Switzerland and Germany are also just as well disposed towards you, as is that person of the Info Secta in Zurich, as well as the officiating pastor and the likewise officiating pastor of who, however, all have to hold back and conceal just as much that they are in contact with you and insert much from the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of the life in their sermons, as I have already noticed several times when I listen to their pulpit speeches.
Something is obviously in the air for you to speak so openly about these contacts and things. Will you please tell me what makes you talk about it?
I can do that, of course, but only in secrecy, because the rationale for me bringing up these things is based on...
All that is clear to me now.
Hello, greetings, my friend. Why I come here today is a matter I would like to discuss with you briefly, though it will take me some time to explain it all to you.
Also my greetings, my friend. I did not know you were also coming, you surprise me. But be welcome, Quetzal.
I am sorry, I forgot to mention that. Quetzal was already coming with me, but he stayed outside and inspected the whole area.
What I have to say is on the one hand about your heating system in the center, on the other hand about a gate and a fence, both of which would have to be made. But what I want to explain about both projects is the following.
If it is possible for you, I would like to discuss everything with you on the spot, so that everything will be done according to your wishes.
Thanks, but I have to go now. But I wanted to see you again, and say that I have seen everything on my long tour, and that I am satisfied with everything. My next visit will be when the passage between the two poultry enclosures downstairs and all related work will be finished. Your planning for the project was, in my view, technically good and correct, and in keeping with your skills in this regard, which you also brought to bear.
Thanks, but it is half bad, because learned is learned.
Then I will go now. Goodbye, Edward, my friend.
Goodbye too, Quetzal, and see you again.
I also have to say goodbye soon, Edward, because there are still some things I have to do. But before I go, we still have the following to discuss.